podcast for potential development by and with Uli Vogel. A warm welcome, dear listeners, to our episode today, where I am very, very pleased to welcome Heidi Steinberger. Hello to you, Heidi.
A warm hello to you too, Uli. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we just realized it's been a long time since we've had a conversation with just the two of us. We see each other more often one-to-many, but we do keep in touch a lot. You've been certified with us at Profiling Values for many years now, but I don't want to get ahead of myself, not jump the gun. Today, I won't get into your career path just yet, but very briefly. I'll just quickly share the group structure with our listeners here, and then, as most people already know, things usually turn out differently than you expect, and that's a good thing. We're not doing anything prepackaged here, so to speak, but we've put some thought into it. But then, a unique conversation just has to unfold. So, the first main point, we want to get to know Heidi. And then the second main point, which is also very close to my heart, a suggestion from you, the philosophy behind your business model, more than just interviews. And I think it's really, really important to highlight that, and we'll work that out a bit. Then, in the third step, we'll take a quick look at some tools available on the market. And of course, profiling values also plays a role here, that's clear. And what really interests both of us, as we just discussed earlier, is how the market is changing in the service segments you're active in. So, yeah, let's dive in now. You've been self-employed for a really long time, dear Heidi. That's how we met. You wrote to me earlier during the preparation. That was many years ago as well, when I was working with someone in acquisition. And then you got excited about it pretty quickly and have been working with our tool for many years now. Profiling values. On the go. But just to give a bit of an impression, what were some of the key whys or turning points in your life? Maybe you also have one or two anecdotes that help us get to know Heidi a bit better. I'll pass the ball over to you.
Yes, thanks, Uli. Thanks for the ball. Yes, we've actually known each other for 15 years, since 2009. I checked again, and I've been self-employed for 26 years now. In the field of HR and career consulting, so quite a while. But of course, that wasn't always the case. There is also a life before this time in HR and career consulting. And yes, maybe I'll just quickly go back. How did I get into it? I actually got into HR consulting through a job application when I wanted to leave my employer at the time. I did my professional training there and honestly felt that my efforts weren't really being fully recognized or appreciated the way I thought they should be.
We're already talking about appreciation right at the start here.
Yes, so what does a trained person even count for? In that company, things are probably a bit different today. Yeah, definitely. I applied, and through that application, I ended up in HR consulting a year later. But since you mentioned appreciation and training, yes, I did an apprenticeship and industrial clerk training there. It was at a manufacturing company, mechanical engineering, special machine construction, fairly large. Really one of the best trainers, actually in the whole district. How did I end up there? Yeah, actually just by chance. I have to say, I didn't really get much support from home after school or towards the end of my school years. Maybe there was a bit of a setback when I was in high school, and it was suggested that I should move down a level because my grades were always a bit. It was always a bit touch and go, and the teachers noticed that I was taking it so much to heart that it was actually affecting my personality. So there was a report card that said, Heidi has lost her cheerfulness. And then the signal was clear, move down, get the secondary school diploma. And I did that pretty early, at 15, and that was it. And what happens next? Well, there was no support. Then a friend came along and said, come on, let's do it together. Technical diploma. Okay, so I did the technical diploma, and what's good about that? That you do an internship as part of it. That was, I think, really what saved me. because that's how I got into this industrial company and was able to see everything that goes on there. So from purchasing, sales, even getting a taste of production. And I spent many weeks there. By the end, it was clear to me, I feel comfortable here, I enjoy it, and I feel like I can make a difference here. So I went to the training manager and said, I'd like to apply for an apprenticeship here. And Uli, that was a time, you remember, now you almost have a whole year group. Back then, for one apprenticeship spot, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50.
Trainers, yeah, unbelievable, unimaginable today.
Back then, you had to do tests just to make a selection at all. My advantage was that everyone knew me from all those weeks. I had that apprenticeship spot, then finished my A-levels and went straight in. And as I said, by the end of my training, I was already being headhunted to join sales and export there. That also gave me a good insight into the company's production side. Why am I saying this? Because later on, in HR consulting, I got to know exactly these companies again. Very different industries, whether it was mechanical engineering or electrical engineering. That was back in the early to mid-90s, when the construction industry was booming. Every part of Germany was being built up, and all the HR consultants were busy staffing the construction industry. With construction managers, senior site managers, and that was already a good foundation for me to be able to work with all sorts of different people in consulting, to get along on the client side as well.
Yeah, and I think, the way you're telling it, about that mechanical engineering company, which I actually know by chance, because I also lived in the Oberland for quite a while. And we really do have a good reputation, seeing, how does it actually work from A to Z, so to speak. Also practically, in a company like that, what are the processes there? What about the technology? There's production, there's sales, there's purchasing, and so on. And those are the kinds of things that, as a young person, I think really help you develop a solid understanding of processes, and if you're clever, you can quickly transfer that knowledge to new companies you work with, drawing on something very solid. I can really imagine that, starting from the ground up in personnel consulting, but with that background. You're actually really well equipped. You probably have a much better foundation than many people who have a university degree but haven't really seen the inside of a company yet.
Yeah, looking back, I would definitely agree with that. At the time, though, I was just a learner. Of course, as a young person, you get to know a completely different world. All the way to defining profiles and, in general, how do you even search for a profile? Back then, that was still the way it was. Mostly through job ads, but also through direct approaches. And we didn't have the internet when we started out back then. Things worked in completely different ways. That's why I say I really learned it from the ground up back then. But over the years, as a personnel consultant or career advisor, you always have to keep developing yourself. That means starting in 1997, 1998, always staying in touch with databases. Back in the day, maybe you used to work with things like city directories, company directories, compasses, and whatever else was available back then, everything that's now available digitally. And yes, so, back then, it was a lot of learning, but also developing. And for me, that was a good foundation, and we had top clients. So it was definitely fun, and I just gradually grew into it. I grew into these projects until I was eventually allowed to manage projects independently, taking responsibility for clients. Yeah, and eventually the day came when I said, I think
You can do it yourself too.
yeah, I can do it myself too, and especially in my own style.
Yeah, you told me or wrote to me that the last change just wasn't a match. To the other recruitment agency. I think that's the real paradigm shift. In working life, going from being an employee to being self-employed. And when you look back, did that mainly come out of this mismatch? Or was the desire for freedom always there, Heidi?
So the mismatch was definitely the tipping point that made me say, Now I'm going to do it. So now the time has come and I'm determined and I'm doing it. And then I communicated it directly, left pretty quickly, and started my own business. In May 98. I don't think I've ever regretted it, no. Yeah,
Awesome. It's the same for me. I was a bit later, but we do have parallels. I myself was a personnel consultant at Mercru Urwald back then for 9 years. And we also started out by going through the classified ads on weekends to get in touch with companies and do similar things, just like you said.
from acquisition to working through stacks of evaluations.
Oh, by the laundry basket full. Exactly. It's hard to imagine that now. Yeah, exactly. But what we wanted to get at is that the personnel consulting business was, and maybe still is in some places, often run a bit like assembly line work. Yeah, and especially back then, when a lot of it was still about selection and sorting people out, you focused on the hard facts and barely saw the person behind them. And I think what connects the two of us is looking at it differently. And you put it really nicely, calling it more than just interviews. So I'll toss the ball back to you now, philosophy of the business model. I think it's important for listeners to get a sense of how you see it. And maybe also how I see it.
Yeah, so more than interviews has two sides for me. One is the aspect that I've noticed in interviews. How people open up,
How they actually.
actually, talk about their true motivations, something they probably wouldn't do in a typical job interview at a company. There are always reasons behind it. Why am I currently in the process of reorienting myself? And what do I actually mention to the company? And what do I leave out? But I see a recruitment consultant as someone in between, also as a person of trust. And that was just one thing to realize. Somehow, there are so many stories around it that, at first, have nothing to do with the professional placement or matching of profiles. But on the other hand, I also see this as exactly the right moment to get to know the person behind the story. Because, as you said, the hard facts are about matching the job requirements with the CV. If the CV is already poorly put together, then you don't even get to the hard facts. But is that really the case? And that's still my opinion. The person, their motivations, their whys, their decisions. Why do I do something? Why did I choose to go left instead of right? These are all crucial things for me to get to know someone's personality. And we both know, or we all know, including the listeners, that changing people or personalities is something. It's not necessarily what we want to do or what we can do. We can change behaviors and we can change profiles. Professionally, we can learn new things, we can develop ourselves further. There are all sorts of possibilities, but for me, the crucial thing is the opportunity behind it, together with the corresponding biography.
But you also fit in as a person. I've had the chance to get to know you well, if I may say so. People tend to share things quickly with you because you're there and trust is built. You become a trusted person, and so on. But you also need to have a bit of a knack or talent for that. I have a bit of that too, because I've often noticed that, yes, of course there are the extroverts in interviews, who always share a lot anyway. But with those who maybe aren't, who are more on the introverted side, managing to get them to open up and really speak honestly, I've always found that to be a nice challenge. And to have that trust placed in you. And of course, you have to do the right thing with it too, and handle it properly as well. But is that the same feeling for you that you'd say, yeah, so, that people trust you too?
Yes, absolutely. And that's, I think, for sure. If I talk about my abilities, I do believe that's something I actually bring to the table, and it's something I keep getting told as well. And that's something I'd really like to pass on as well, maybe everyone listening right now, because I'm convinced that everyone has abilities within themselves that we don't always talk about, or that aren't always so obvious. But they're there, and bringing those out, I think, is a really wonderful task. And for me, that's also what led me, in a way, to get more involved in career counseling. We know ourselves that when we fill a position for a client these days, it's usually just one person who gets hired. But during the selection process, there are so many other people we talk to, and we realize, wow, they're all great candidates, but in the end, only one fits.
And
To keep working with the candidates, or maybe even offer some support if someone is struggling with how to position or present themselves. Right up to the point where, quite obviously, a CV might already be outdated. And you say, wow, you have so much to offer, but please just tweak this a little bit here. These were all little bits of support that really made sense to me. To focus more on this area of career coaching and career counseling, because of course I enjoy it too. So really working one-on-one with people and seeing what comes out of it, what can happen, I find that incredibly rewarding. That really is my why even today, especially when I look back. I didn't have that back then. When your self-esteem suffers a significant blow, maybe because you feel like you failed in some personal or professional areas, and you don't really have anywhere to turn for support. I think that's exactly where professional coaching can be so incredibly valuable, to work through these difficult things, to get some much-needed encouragement, and to be made fully aware of all the untapped potential and hidden strengths that are still inside you.
yeah, and we can really give each other so much. A philosopher once said, we only become through you to I, so we need others. A former boss of mine in HR consulting used to say, hey, we always have to be clear about where we stand, who pays us. It's the company, and that's where we belong. But I would only agree with that to a certain extent. I wouldn't sign off on that completely. I really like how you approach this, saying that we should look at individuals more holistically, drawing from our own experiences. Maybe also giving them something so that they can improve themselves, so they can present themselves even better. I actually think that's a really, how should I put it, a really good, bridge-building approach that has led you to both sides. You work as a personnel consultant, of course for a company, that's the search assignment, but you also work in career counseling for individuals who reach out to you. And you mentioned that most of these people come to you privately. How did you actually develop that, Heidi? Because that's not so easy. To build up a reputation for yourself.
Yeah, they certainly came with the thought, I'll turn to the personnel consultant. So I then offered this career coaching, at least in parallel. Often, these were just individual sessions, and with COVID, that completely became a process. Yes, so, for me, of course, we all had plenty of time. First off, even in our little home offices, what are we going to do now with these things? We can't meet up. Personnel consulting wasn't really in demand anymore either, since a lot of companies just weren't hiring at first. That,
Please.
also a real roller coaster, you know that too. It's either all or nothing. Yeah, that's when I realized for myself, there needs to be a complete process. From location analysis to even personality. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that, personality diagnostics. Profiling values also plays a role there. That's a crucial role. About possibilities, what options do I even have? What interests me? What could I do besides my previous career path? Which direction could things go? All the way to actually putting that into practice in the job market. For me, that's a complete process, one you can't just get through in 2 or 3 hours.
So that also means a longer period of support. Back then, I don't know if there were already a lot of outplacement programs around during the COVID era. I'm not in that business anymore, but if you have people paying out of pocket now, then it's definitely a longer process, where you might even provide ongoing support, like when people are onboarding, or is that how it works?
Well, on the one hand, outplacement is still a thing. And it was during the pandemic that it became necessary to offer it online, or even required. And from that idea, I developed a longer-term program for private payers.
Who?
Take part over a period of 3 to 6 months. Or just individual modules if needed. Some people need more support in one area, while others need help somewhere else. And that's how it gradually became established. And yes, I was of course more present on social media as well, you could say. Whether it was on platforms like LinkedIn or now even Xing again. And that's really the topic there. Labor market, job search, coaching, career, those are big topics there.
Yeah, so I have to jump in with a question here because I'm curious. How does someone actually become a LinkedIn top voice? Let's spill the beans. Heidi. I'd be interested to know too, but I have no idea how you get there.
All right, I'll spill the beans now, and you might be disappointed by what I say, but you get approached. It's not something you can make happen from the outside. One day, I got an email from LinkedIn from the editorial team.
And
I honestly thought it was fake. So I checked the addresses and read it several times to see if these people even existed. And sure enough, I was then invited to be a LinkedIn top voice. And yeah, there's something similar now on the other platform, Xing, as an insider. And I'm there too, yeah.
you see, that's great. Wonderful. Was that when you developed these career counseling programs? Was it, in a way, like a kind of self-employment reloaded? You basically started from scratch again, yeah, and actually reconceptualized this whole support process. Sure, we all had time back then, but what kind of feeling does that give you inside? You've been self-employed for a long time, and now you're basically building up this branch. You're really rebuilding this segment from the ground up. What kind of feeling does that give an entrepreneur like you?
On the one hand, it was the necessity to think things through. At that point, I'd already had an office in Munich for 10 years. Now all of that is kind of obsolete if you're supposed to work online from home. And on the other hand, I professionalized it. And today, that gives me a good feeling. Because there's just a whole new level of clarity behind it. And with work materials, there's
A lot.
of potential there. You really nailed it right away with profiling values and also with the academy. It's a real gold mine, ultimately, for us as users to have everything in one place here. That's basically how I developed it for career counseling as well. And with that, of course, I can now support all kinds of different people. And you can see that with private clients too, whether it's the student who chose the wrong
Program.
and now finds herself caught in the tension between her parents. We have many clients who may have experienced bullying, suffered from burnout, or even had to undergo therapy and are now looking to get back into the workforce. Or even long-time employees who are considering whether to stay or leave after 15, 20, or 25 years. So there are so many different types of client questions, but with this process, we can always jump in somewhere, always find the right starting point, and work towards a solution. And that's also important to me, to have a solution at the end of the day.
So, thanks for the compliment about us having good materials. But I honestly didn't expect you to get so involved like that. I think that's absolutely great because it also lets you scale things to some extent. On the one hand, but on the other hand, you can also assign certain tasks to your coachee, which means that you don't just deal with things sporadically when you've met or talked, but that it really becomes a journey. Doing it together makes it really exciting, I think. Awesome. And you always have diagnostics included as well. Of course, the fact that you're with us now, we've already mentioned, and it's certainly an important tool. But professionalization in areas like HR consulting, career coaching, and potential analysis is really necessary these days. The market has really grown a lot, so maybe that's why. How do you use it? Where do you put your focus? What's the essence of the methodology for you? And what criteria do you use when choosing something?
I have to admit, I've always been very receptive to personality diagnostics or testing methods, because it's a way to learn a bit more about yourself. Also,
Hey,
very good way to do it. And still, I think you really have to set strict quality criteria, which are often discussed as well. How good is a testing method, really?
we.
all know that a testing method can never fully capture a whole person. How could it? But for me, it's an objective building block, a tool. Also, with this perspective, this documentation, it's about opening people's eyes a bit and showing them what's inside them, or maybe even where the real problem lies. And just through this kind of documentation, we know that some people need a bit more data, more paperwork. That reinforces things, and it always serves as a foundation for the next discussion. How do you integrate this into day-to-day operations? What are you working on? What do you want to strengthen? Where do you want to improve a bit? And where does it help just to know that you are the way you are?
Yes, so, to also do this kind of self-reflection. And of course, not everything is correct, but it gives you impulses and suggestions, and also interesting things, even things you might not really want to look at. The week before last, I was with a client in Vienna. And there, an American executive put it very nicely and started the presentation with this. All models are wrong, but some are useful. Yeah, and I thought it was pretty good that we just got that out of the way first. Hey folks, so modeling people, or anything else for that matter, is never reality, but some things are just helpful. And I think that really sums it up well in this context.
Yeah, and that's why I tried out a lot of things, and in the end, I stuck with 3 of them. That's been the case since 2009 now. Profiling values, which I also find incredibly valuable for leaders. And that's something I use as well. And of course, there's another model, which also is based on the Big Five and is a model that deals with values, motives, and roles.
Goes in that direction.
And now we can't just use one method after another, but we can apply them selectively when it makes sense. In career counseling scenarios, I always think it's worthwhile, because it always has to do with personality, getting a bit better at assessing yourself. And especially for people who are introverted, we talked about this earlier, or for those who currently have less self-confidence, it's incredibly helpful to understand what you're particularly good at. Because those are exactly the things that are so familiar and so natural to us that we don't even recognize them as strengths. That's always an enlightening part, as I usually hear in the feedback from my clients. They say, "That was wonderful." Yes,
But that also depends on the person applying it, the one who is trained in that area. And I think that's where it always starts, with the trust that's given to you. But also the empathy you have to maybe go through this results sheet with people, maybe even set a few priorities together. And I do this every day, too. I always find it fascinating to discover things together with people, where you can really strengthen something, identify potential and help to bring it out, but also address certain areas for development and take the edge off the negative extremes. So, there's still a lot in there, and it's great that it's being used so widely. But let's take another look at where the market is heading, your market and mine as well. Always, so to speak. It's always connected to that, because the majority of our certified users are actually working in consulting and coaching. So, when you look at your segments, career counseling, potential analysis, and also HR consulting, and consider the current market trends, maybe even the new things coming in, tell us a bit about the trends in this direction and your opinion on them. Maybe we can toss a few ideas back and forth.
yeah, the trend. I'll put it this way, the internet is full of opportunities to inform yourself, take all sorts of self-learning courses, and even study more books. All of that is just incredible. There are so many options, which of course don't involve the consultant, so that one-on-one interaction. That one-on-one with the consultant might fall away. I think that's definitely an issue. If you ask today, how do I write an application? We use AI, everything happens automatically. I don't see it that way. There's a risk in focusing only on those things. But as a consultant, I'll always be able to work one-on-one with clients. And what I can offer is an outside perspective. You just don't get that outside perspective from a book or from an online self-paced course that's just talking at you. And that's where I see an opportunity, at least to continue making a difference as a consultant. But of course, there's always the risk of making yourself redundant as the user, in other words, as the one seeking advice. If we look at HR consulting, a lot has already changed there too. When it comes to active sourcing, especially with larger companies building entire pools of active sourcers who now try every possible way to approach and win over candidates, I see that somewhat critically.
Yeah. That's an overload. Yeah, for sure. That probably creates a negative image at some point, too. Yeah.
Yeah, overload. I think even there, it's really about quality. You've been in this business long enough yourself. In some segments, I only have a handful of candidates I can actually approach. So every approach has to hit the mark. And I really have to prepare in advance, at least that's what I do. I prepare thoroughly for every potential candidate and already think about whether this is a potential fit, what I can offer them, what their next step could be, and whether it all lines up. And I'd argue that if I have an active sourcing pool today, with young people who are just starting out in their careers, how are they supposed to have that kind of know-how? It just doesn't work.
That's also the point where we really need to be careful with artificial intelligence. We have this background of experience now, and sometimes it's amazing how you can use it. And then something gets spit out, and you're able to judge it well, too. But what about the really young people who don't have that wealth of experience? I think that's a really important point. Although I'd like to add that it's also a positive thing that people can take a lot more into their own hands. For example, having a didactic principle like 70-20-10, where only 10% is done, so to speak, with the coach, with the trainer, with whoever is running it live, so to speak. 20% is done among peers, where you support each other, and 70% is really self-directed learning, using all sorts of different media. That doesn't make the coach or the trainer obsolete. But in the end, it might even make their work more interesting, instead of always having to drill the basics off the shelf.
Yeah, when I realize that I actually have a topic where I might need to have a conversation. And I still notice that today, even in HR consulting, you still get conversation partners today, or at first, just CVs. They're not from 2024. Really, it's accessible to everyone, and anyone can get informed. And when you ask about it, I get surprised looks, so yeah. It's true, when people have been in their own bubble for a long time.
Yeah.
Even there, they always get their information from the same sources. Then I don't think that's ideal for being able to keep repositioning yourself in the job market over the long term. Yeah,
Which, yeah, is the task at hand.
just like we as advisors have to keep developing, everyone in the job market will have to keep evolving too.
Yeah, and this whole development thing definitely isn't going to slow down. No, definitely not. It's definitely going to speed up too. And you also mentioned earlier what happens if AI suddenly becomes part of the application process. And at the point where things are pre-sorted, then at some point it will, of course, become non-transparent and difficult. So maybe, just to wrap things up, what is your overall outlook, both on the potential positive developments, and maybe also regarding the various risks that are currently emerging? What is your comprehensive trend summary for the future of the market?
You mean for AI?
Yeah, I think AI is going to play a huge role, so I'd really like to focus on that now, yeah.
Yeah, so I still think we're using AI. We can't really avoid it in all sorts of areas. But we also have to keep in mind that this AI is an automated system that we need to feed, and that we also need to master to a certain extent in order to use it properly and sensibly. And when it comes to selecting candidates, of course, criteria are entered for that. Whether they're always correct and whether the results actually reflect that, I think that's something that will only really become clear over the next few years. It'll crystallize over time. But that's something, of course, we're going to use it.
You just have to, as you said, and you're right, feed it properly, meaning train and improve it. This is really the tool that's moving us forward.
And where do we actually want to go? What do we want to achieve? This automation is, on the one hand, meant to simply eliminate monotonous tasks. That's why I'm not really afraid that AI will take away our jobs, not at all. On the contrary, it actually creates new ones. But you have to use it in moderation, in the right place, and under the right circumstances. And we're all still learners in this.
Hopefully, we'll always stay that way. Well, I'm a curious person, and I think you are too. So, in that sense, nothing can really go wrong. We'll keep moving forward as learners. Heidi, thank you so much for being here and for this fascinating conversation. We really went from one thing to another, I think. We touched on a lot of things that our listeners were interested in. And it was relaxed, and I think at times even exciting. Thank you for your valuable time, and hopefully see you very soon, Heidi.
Uli, thank you so much and best regards.
And thanks to our listeners as well. See you soon. Bye.